Hello again. I'm Brownfield Ag News anchor and reporter Ken Anderson, and I'm visiting once again today with Frank Chen, journalist with the Asia Times media outlet. Frank is based in Hong Kong, and he's also a native of China, which gives him an interesting perspective on U.S.-China relations and events taking place in that part of the world. Frank, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Ken.
Appreciate the opportunity to catch up with you here. And it's been a couple months since we last visited. You've certainly been on my mind as I've watched the reports of the massive protests that have been taking place in Hong Kong over the past few weeks, that you believe those protests are indirectly related to the tensions between the U.S. and China. So give us your take on those protests and why you believe they are connected to the U.S.-China dispute.
Well, the entire saga, the entire debacle, as well as what some people say, the beginning of the slow death of Hong Kong, or started with a love story that ended in murder. Last year, a Hong Kong couple, but I'm not sure whether they are actually married, but a Hong Kong guy killed his girlfriend, killed his partner after discovering that she had been pregnant with a baby whose father was another man, while the couple was traveling in Taiwan. So the Hong Kong guy, the murderer, fled the island, got back to Hong Kong, but the city's government could not extradite him back to the island to face trial, simply because of the lack of a formal extradition bill between the two jurisdictions. But later, the Hong Kong government, in particular the city's chief executive, the city's top leader, Carrie Lam, discovered that the Taiwan murder case could be a godsend, could be a perfect excuse for the authorities to table an amendment bill to change existing laws to allow rendition of fugitives, wanted persons, or virtually anyone to Taiwan, Macau, or even mainland China. These jurisdictions where currently there is no such extradition arrangement between Hong Kong and these places. And the result of the government's initial internal assessment deliberation was that the Taiwan murder case could be strong enough to convince Hong Kong people, to persuade them that the city did need such kind of one-size-fits-all extradition agreement bill for the sake of justice. But apparently, Carrie Lam and the Hong Kong government have grossly underestimated people's resolve to defend their rights, freedoms. Back in the early 1980s, when China's top leader Deng Xiaoping conceived the one country, two systems framework, and the reason why London agreed to it was that it could best preserve rights, freedoms, and liberty in Hong Kong. All of these are still largely non-existent in mainland China. And the segregation between the two jurisdictions, the segregation between Hong Kong and mainland China are among those elements that underpins one country, two systems. On one hand, we have robust independent judiciary, robust press freedom, human rights safeguards in Hong Kong. And on the other hand, there is no such a thing as an independent judiciary in mainland China. But some people say that since other countries can negotiate and sign similar extradition agreements, then Hong Kong and mainland China can do the same. But this is precisely because Hong Kong has never been a sovereign state, that Hong Kong being a special administrative region under Beijing's suzerainty, under Beijing's authority, sovereignty, that Hong Kong people do not have confidence that their officials, the Hong Kong government, will have the guts to speak up for them whenever their overlords in Beijing hand down a decree to request that they want this guy or that guy to be sent across the border. So this is basically a problem about confidence. This is exactly why when the Hong Kong government obviously secured approval from Beijing beforehand, made a series of concessions and inserted some safeguards, Hong Kong people were still skeptical. And they believe that Beijing can simply trump up crimes to target political dissidents, journalists, investors, or even a foreign tycoon, or even an American or a Canadian who lives in Hong Kong. So this is basically the background of the entire protests. Carrie Lam, in the meanwhile, has made a series of silly blunders and missed many opportunities to make peace with Hong Kong people to prevent this situation from getting any worse. On June the 9th, when between hundreds of thousands and a million Hong Kong people took to the street to protest against the bill, Carrie Lam issued a statement saying that she respected people's rights to express their views, a statement that ended with a tone-deaf line that the second reading of the extradition bill would proceed as scheduled on June the 12th in the city's legislature. This is why on that day, on June the 12th, we have seen such a big scale of confrontations between protesters and the police anti-rout squad. And let me show you some pictures here. Not sure whether it should be clear enough. This is the front page. This is the front page of the South China Morning Post about the confrontations on that day, June the 12th. Police firing hundreds of canisters of tear gas and even rubber bullets for the first time at Hong Kong protesters in the city's CBD. And here we have Carrie Lam weeping tears in a TV program interview. Some of her critics said that they were crocodile's tears. And we have another picture here, two protesters being surrounded in tear gas smoke in Hong Kong CBD. The city's heart was transformed into a war zone. And here, some Chinese, the front pages of some Chinese papers here. Apple Daily, the city's pro-democracy broadsheet about the mass demonstration, and here about the police crackdown, the police brutality, firing tear gas and rubber bullets, and another respected Chinese newspaper about the protests. So here, it's apparent that had Carrie Lam heeded people's calls, people's clamor at the beginning of June and suspended the bill, then the entire confrontation, confusion, schism, rift could have been avoided in total. And interestingly, the US has been assuming a very active role in opposing this bill. Beijing has been accusing Washington of leading an alliance against the bill. And obviously, Beijing was quite angry. The reason was quite simple. According to the US Consulate General in Hong Kong, actually this is one of the Washington's largest diplomatic missions overseas, bigger than many US embassies in other foreign countries, that there are 85,000 US citizens living in Hong Kong, and there are 1,400 American companies doing business in Hong Kong, including Apple, Citi, Microsoft, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, United Airlines. All of these companies, they use Hong Kong as the regional hub for their business across Asia Pacific. So the Washington is quite concerned about the bill as it may jeopardize the safety of the numerous US citizens and American companies in Hong Kong. And the fear is that the bill is so far-reaching that even an American citizen who transit to another plane at the Hong Kong airport could be extradited to China because it applies to anyone in Hong Kong. So let's come to the, this has come to the final question about who proposed this bill. Some say that this is a stone of Carrie Lam's own making, that she just wanted to score some brownie points in front of her Beijing masters, overlords, that Beijing has long expressed its displeasure over the fact that Hong Kong has been a haven for fugitives, criminals who just across the border and mainland police can can no longer nab them theoretically in Hong Kong. But I believe that this whole saga, the incident, may have everything to do with the ongoing Sino-US trade war, especially the after Canada arrested a senior executive of Chinese telecom giant Huawei in Vancouver last year at the request of the US. Meng Wanzhou, or Sabrina Meng, she was detained in Vancouver when changing to another flight in December last year, and Beijing thought it can retaliate by pressing the Hong Kong government to enact the extradition bill, because this city, as a premier financial and business hub, is home to so many US and Canadian and British companies, and there are so many Westerners still living here, that Beijing think that it can revenge on the Meng Wanzhou's arrest. And Beijing, when there is such a bill, Beijing can order the extradition, the rendition of anyone, of any American or a Canadian or a Brit to China, whether or not he or she has committed a crime or not.
Trade negotiations between the U.S. and China have been basically at a standstill, although the two sides have been talking by telephone over the past couple of weeks, and there are reports they're trying to set up another face-to-face meeting. So what are you hearing about the negotiations over there?
Well, from my side, that I find that most of the Chinese people, as well as the officials, they this time around, they simply do not have too much expectations from the resumed trade talks. There have been reports that the two sides, the representatives from the two countries, may meet face to face very soon, following the G20 summit talk between President Donald Trump and President Xi. But given the propaganda and given the patriotic sentiment that have been widespread among average Chinese people, that they believe that one way or another, America is bent on tuning down China. America is bent on to stand the China's revival. That trade war can be a very effective means, and even there is a deal this time around. It is the Chinese people that that believe that America will never honor its own promises made in a trade deal, if there is one. And some people have been seriously talking about, continue to boycott some American brands like Apple or other American brands that may soon be singled out if there is another downturn in the trade talk, if the new trade talk breaks down again. So this time around, Chinese people are quite patriotic, and they do not have too much expectations.
And as we've discussed before, the possibility that the Chinese at this point have decided to wait and see what happens in the next U.S. presidential election, hoping, I suppose, that President Trump may not be reelected. They may have somebody easier to deal with.
Well, certainly this is the sort of wishful thinking among some Chinese netizens, some Chinese young people believe that it is just because of Donald Trump. It is this guy. He's such a hardliner, and he hates China. That's why he has been waging this trade war. That's why he has been selling arms to Taiwan. That's why he has been vocally supporting the protests in Hong Kong. But I think more sensible people high up in the Chinese society, those folks in Zhongnanhai, those people within the China's top leadership, they may be fully aware, whether they like it or not, that counting China or waging a full rivalry against China is somehow a bipartisan consensus in the U.S. And even some of the Democrats, they have realized that they were too accommodative towards China's rising. They were too accommodative to China's bossing around in Asia Pacific, or even nowadays China has been making inroads into South Africa, into the Caribbean, into Europe, trying to debase the U.S. influence there. So they may be aware that even, say, Joe Biden becomes the president, he may be just as harsh, may just be as headstrong in its dealings with China. And so the Chinese leadership cannot simply count on the outcome of the upcoming president election, something that they can never control. They wish they can be Russians. They wish they can influence the outcome. But I don't think that the Chinese intelligence organ or the espionage or the Chinese spies or the Chinese hackers may have the capability to sway public sentiments in the U.S., let alone that the U.S. has been on the lookout for any attempt to, to influence the election. So I think that the Chinese leadership, may not tell people the fact, but they themselves may be fully aware that this time around they really have to brace for more challenges ahead.
Always good to get your perspective, Frank, and appreciate you taking time to visit with us.
Thank you, Ken. My pleasure.
Frank Chen, a journalist with the Asia Times media outlet based in Hong Kong. I'm Ken Anderson on Brownfield.